Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Your magical kiss will take me just so far. Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Don't leave me like this, dangling from a star. You set me all aflame and it's so pleasing. It sure would be a shame if you were only teasing. So my love, before I go, turn the lights way down low and talk to me. Talk to me, talk to me. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Don McKeag Show. Hope you get home safely. Little bit dicey out there. It's January 15th already. Kenny Bukes is in there to answer the telephone. Should you care to call with a question or a disagreement or an agreement, whatever you would like. My name is Don McKeag, as I mentioned. We are on this hour on Thursdays, every Thursday, and we can be seen in reruns during the rest of the week, 9 o'clock on Tuesdays, 11 o'clock at night, I believe, on Mondays, and 9 o'clock on, Sundays. I start my shows off. I also do a radio show. I keep mentioning it so that you can also avail yourselves of the Don McKeag Show on Cape Cod, station WXTK. I am a conservative, proud to be, and I try very hard for 1 hour to point out the changes I've seen in my 70-plus years that I'm very concerned with, not for myself, but for the young couples trying to bring up kids today, earn a living, and for my grandkids. It is not good, and it is now clearly evident that the side that has been in control in terms of our thinking has no intention of changing their ways, and it is unfortunate. But the station is WXTK in Barnstable, Cape Cod, and we are on 95.1 FM every Saturday from 11 to 1 in addition to this show. Both of these shows, I begin with something that I find extremely important, and that is to learn from the past. We are a country that is decaying from inside, as every great nation has. We are not unique. We're the best there ever was. We still can be at times. We still have the greatest people on the face of the earth, and I don't care what party, the political party, or what race, or what religion. We have the greatest people that have done more than all other countries combined for a long time now. And that's one of the things that I try very hard to point out and diminish this continued jumping on the ills of America by the press and by the left and by too many liberal Democrats at the top, not the voters. But this particular saying, I think, applies, and I read it every week, to have you ponder it. It was uttered by Martin Luther. It will be Martin Luther King's day, his celebration of his life on Monday, where buildings are closed nationwide. This is the man Martin Luther King was named for.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
You're pushing your microphone down into your belly.
It is sliding, you mean. I'm not pushing it. Thank you, Kenneth. Well, I'm glad you noticed that. Now, did we lose any of my valuable dialogue?
You just woke them up.
Anyway, Martin Luther, for those who are listening the first time, and if not, it's just a reminder, was a Catholic priest, a devoted Catholic priest from Germany, who saw the deterioration, what had happened to the Catholic Church at the top. Remember, this is in the 16th century. And what I'm going to read you is from the year 1526. And he did something about it, and of course it resulted in the Protestant Reformation. It was not that he wanted to not be Catholic. It was because the top was so powerful that it became necessary to just split, to separate. And but here's what he says. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular. But he or she must take that position because his conscience tells him it is right. And I keep asking, how many people, we all have a conscience, I don't care what you say, there's things that bother you. We know the difference between right and wrong. But the country's more important to me than myself. My personal self-esteem is important. But I don't care so much anymore about what other people think. Of course, we all want to be liked and loved or whatever. But, you know, when it comes to telling the truth and trying to rectify, my generation has not done a good job. We benefited from the greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw, the retired TV commentator in his book, talked about World War II. And I believe this was the best time. I believe my generation had it the best. Everyone was, pretty near everyone was a churchgoer. Why? Because just about every family had either lost a relative or lost a neighbor or had one come back maimed and never right again. Everyone had to go through tough times. There were quotas. They gave out food stamps when food stamps really mattered. I remember I came from Weymouth, Massachusetts, the second oldest town after Plymouth in the whole Northeast. And I remember the Victory Gardens. I was just a little boy. And all the neighbors on my street, there was a former farm across the street that was still undeveloped, and all of the neighbors had gone out, tilled their own section, whatever amount of space they determined to want for their garden. And I remember as a little boy too eating the peas right off the pod and eating the fresh beans. And you know, as I said, gas was rationed. Butter was rationed. I remember my grandmother, gum was the same as it is today, although I don't know if it's aluminum anymore, but the covers on the, you know, the slices of gum, I remember my grandmother having us, she'd get it from the drugstore or whatever, people who threw their wrappings away or whatever, and we'd peel off the aluminum, roll it into balls, and people would sell it back to the government because it would then be used in producing metal. I just, again, I'm concerned that we do not seem to have the same appreciation in today's, certainly in today's media. They have learned, unfortunately, that bad news sells and chaos sells. Good news, oh, isn't that nice? But keep the people unhappy. Keep focusing on what's wrong, and you'll sell airtime. You know, TV's all about ratings because, of course, that's how they get revenue. A lot of people, by the way, I thought I might mention this, having been in the radio business for over 24 years. I'd like to tell you something about the media that a lot of you may not know. You'll hear ratings, you hear it about television, oh, the ratings book and all these things. Well, what does it mean to you and me? Well, what it means to the networks and to the individual radio stations is they sell more, they appeal more to corporations and so forth based on how many people, if it's TV, how many people are watching. If it's radio, how many people are listening. In radio, it's called Arbitron. I forget now it used to be the Nielsen ratings or whatever on TV, and I don't know what it is now. So, and corporations, by the way, they don't care what the program is. I mean, they don't care about the quality of the program. If there's a lot of people listening, that's what the advertising executive goes with. I don't care if it's Coca-Cola or insurance companies. All those big things go with what shows do well. That's why you see cancellations. That's why you see new shows all the time. They aren't getting enough watching, or in the case of radio business, they're not getting enough listeners, so that the salespeople can't sell that hour or that particular time. Now, public television, it's different. We don't do advertising, so it's not of a concern that way. But when it's a money-making proposition, then that's the capitalistic society. I pulled this off again. Well, that's because you didn't put it into my shirt, see? I shouldn't listen to you, Kenny boy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ken Hughes. Why don't you put your face over this? I'm not going to listen to you anymore. So now, forgive me, ladies and gentlemen. You didn't care anyway, did you, huh? I think we're back. Let's see how that worked, Kenny boy. All right. All right. So anyway, that's just a little tidbit. And anyway, so but what I wanted to talk about too was a couple of things. I talked on the radio, something that was interesting. I thought, I'm reading this book on Charles Lindbergh. Very, very interesting. I recommend it. It's by A. Scott Berg, those of you that read. I was not aware. We are aware of who Charles Lindbergh was. You'd have to be, even the young ones, I think. I hope the schools talk about him. But it's very interesting that he was the single most known man in the world for years and years and years. And admired, I might add. Very modest young man. He was only 25 when he flew 36 hours, 30 minutes, and 30 seconds from Roosevelt Field in New York to, I think it's Le Bourget Airfield in Paris, France. The whole world was listening. Now, this was in the this was 1927. This is in the relatively new stages of radio. So that's how people followed it. And unfortunately, his success created what we now have to live with, and that is a deteriorated, money-grubbing mentality called the paparazzi. The media learned how much money could be made. People were lining up at newspapers. Of course, this is before television. So people were lining up to buy the paper. They did extras. You see in old movies, the extra for any big event that happens. Well, it was Lindbergh that really took that to another level. Of course, they had, for World War I, it started. I don't mean to say he was the only one, but from an individual personality, he was, for the rest of it, he could no longer live in this country. It became so bad. And 80 years ago, this month, January 2nd, his first son was kidnapped and killed, and it was the trial of the century. And it was 80 years ago this year, 1935, imagine. But in this book, it talks about, he went through all of the stages that led, not only through World War I, but all of the things that led up to World War II. And this author does a spectacular job of writing all about it. And in it is a very interesting thing that's pertinent to today, and why I wanted to mention it today to you, and that is, in this particular book, in the section that I was in just a little while ago, it talks about leadership, and it talks about what happens to democracies. Now remember, Thomas Jefferson predicted, or I should say said, because he was well read, and that is, if we get 200 years out of this government, this democracy, we will be lucky. And a lot of people say, well, they know why is that, but, because it's people, and we see it now in Congress. Congress right now is ineffectual at best, period. They go through the motions. The position has become so lucrative and so well-known and so ego-boosting that they want to all get reelected. This is the biggest reason why we have these problems, in my humble opinion. And that is because one party, now the Republicans, tries to appeal to the conservative side, the Democrats, of which I once was, and now I just find them offensive. The leadership, not Democrats, not people who vote Democrat. But no one's ever, to my knowledge, dealt with why Jefferson felt that way, historically. History tells them that's why Jefferson felt that way. And one of the things that is now so apparent is why the left-leaning people back in the 1700s, this is what we have going on, by the way, it's nothing new. Went on in Rome, went on in Greece. But I always wondered why there was so much stress on this separation of church and state. And of course, it was Thomas Jefferson that wrote this in the Declaration of Independence, I believe, or the whatever, but not in the Constitution. But he never meant that there should not be religion tied into government. What it was meant, and it still is, and it's just been maligned and misused, is there should be no single religion. There should be no rejection of other religions being honored and practiced by their people. Big difference. Big difference. There is absolutely no reason that we can't have "In God We Trust" on the bills that we've had, I don't know, since the 40s, I think. The only reason is because minorities don't like it because they're either agnostic or atheists. And today, minorities rule. Minority positions rule. Under Democratic leadership, it's minorities first. Remember that. And it's scary. But in this book, now this is 1937, just as Hitler was building up. He talks about, this is Lindbergh, who has learned about the depths of the heights of Western achievement and the depths of Western failure. One realizes how easily strength can be perverted into decay, how human wisdom was more essential to the temple's walls than the rock on which it stood. The rock on which we've stood is the Constitution. The Constitution, not building buildings, not other things. This is what's made this country great. A Judeo-Christian, Christian Judeo-religious belief is the foundation, the rock on which this country became great, as did every other. Even pagan countries, if you look at the history. The Native Americans worshipped. They worshipped the sun. They worshipped the Great White Father. So when you hear these people say that religion or whatever, they don't know what they're talking about as far as what is part of the human being. I believe it's part of the divine formation of man and women, and that it ties in with our knowledge of right and wrong. That's what makes us different than animals. But anyway, so in this particular time, this is just before the Nazis, Lindbergh talks about what useless conflicts there had been through intervening centuries, again, because all of a sudden they became materialistic. Look at the Romans. It became about money and spending money. And as they fought wars, this is another thing I don't know if I don't think schools today generally do a very good job. And I'm sorry, it offends some teachers, and that's fine. But I know, having been a teacher, I saw it deteriorating. We're more concerned with social issues. Again, minority positions. Even in Plymouth and Carver, I've done questionnaires with I was in the restaurant business. I've employed a lot of kids and a lot of adults. And I'm just appalled at how little concern and how little they really know about the founding fathers of Plymouth. Oh, they know the names, but they don't know what they went through. Too often the history in today's schools starts at the Civil War, and it becomes racist right there. When you talk about racism, start looking at the schools. Obviously, that should be a big part of it. But I will tell you that Washington, and this is another thing that I'm going to talk about, what Washington went through in this desperate winter of 1779 and 80. I wonder if that's talked about in the schools during the Washington. You know, we have Martin Luther King's birthday. Fine, should be. But they eliminated George Washington's birthday. Without George Washington, if you've read any history, we would not have the United States of America, period. His detractors, his enemies, begged him to take a second term. He wanted no part of a second term. People don't teach this. And to lop him in and have a President's Day is another part of the insidious need for some people to denigrate and minimize the importance of the United States of America and on what we stand. And it's dangerous. And when people like I talk about it, I take heat, and I don't care. It's got to change. I don't know if you noticed, well, you had to if you watched the news. They had a bunch of bird brains up there in Milton. How'd you like to be going to work? How'd you like to have your wife, or if you're a woman watching me, how'd you like to be pregnant and ready to go, or break water, and you are in trying to get to the hospital, and you can't get there because some 20 or so nitwits decide to protest about black treatment at 7:30 in the morning. They back up traffic for 5 hours. They had patients in ambulances that were critical that had to be rerouted. And that's freedom of speech? I'm sorry, it is not, but it is in Massachusetts. It is in the liberal courts. They've got a liberal judge up there that'll slap them on the hand. They should do a minimum of 30 days. And then there should be a law. Now, we have a law, ladies and gentlemen, about theaters. You go to jail if you yell fire in a theater. Why? For the same reason I'm saying these courts have got to get tough on things like today. Private tax-paying citizens who earn a living and pay these lawyers, judges, and politicians their salary and their health care and their retirements deserve to be protected against this kind of nonsense. This is not about free speech. It's attention-getting, and the media's right in there with them. So, getting back, though, to what just before the Nazis took over, here is what I just found this particular sentence that I just think it is so enlightening now. Hopefully, It's a library book, so I didn't underline. I didn't underline it. Now we'll see. Excuse me, if I can find the darn thing. Isn't that awful? Now I'm going to lose. I thought I had it, and I don't. But what it basically talks about is that faith is the salvation of the human race. And faith is the strength, the core of a successful democracy. Having a belief in something that rules over all of us. And using, now why he says this is if you look at Mussolini, fascism, you look at Hitler, Nazism, you look at Stalin, communism, you don't have to like it, and I'm not proposing that we have this, but I'm just saying that when people are focused on leaders and are told what to do, we do not do well, ladies and gentlemen, with too much freedom. It's been proven. We're not doing well with it right now. That's the mess we're in. We have too many people being catered to who just don't care about anyone but themselves. They're a minority, but thanks to the Democratic Party, they are in control. Now, I've got a thing here. By the way, did you know, I'll get back to Washington, the war on Alzheimer's. This is very interesting. Now, I've known a couple, I'm in my 70s, but I've known a couple of people, well, I've known more than a couple. I guess probably my mind tries to forget it. It's a terrible way to go. But I did not know. Here are the people who died of Alzheimer's. Now, some of them were older, no question, but some of them weren't. And by the way, there's this movie out with Juliet, what's her name, the redhead that's the good actress, the great actress. Juliet, come on, Kenny. Anyway, it's something about Alice, but it's about a younger woman who has early onset of Alzheimer's.
I saw the promo for it, but
Yes.
I can't remember her name
Oh, gee,
specifically.
she's well known, and it's my. See, I mean, maybe I got it, but I don't know if you knew this. I mean, we know Ronald Reagan died of it, but I didn't know Floyd Patterson, the former heavyweight champ,
Did not know that.
died of it. William de Kooning, an artist, died of it. Jimmy Stewart, I did not know he died of it. Did you?
No, I didn't.
And Maggie Thatcher, of course, she lived a long time with it. So that was sad. William Proxmire, the senator, who was quite visible in his heyday. Etta James, the great jazz singer.
Oh, great singer.
Charles Bronson.
Kidding.
Yeah. And, of course, Ben Bradley Sr., Washington Post.
Yep.
And the other one is, oh, God, he had lost an eye. He played the lieutenant in, oh, good grief, the detective show with the baggy trousers and the baggy.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, come on. His
yeah.
name's,
It's
and I know it as well. But Perry Como, now, I did not know Perry Como died of Alzheimer's. Abigail Van Buren, dear Abby. Cyrus Vance, the former Secretary of State, I forget which president.
Really?
Of course, Charles Heston, Charlton Heston, who was a great actor, and of course,
You'll pry my gun out of my cold, dying hands, I think is what he's known for. Yeah.
and of course, he was despised by the liberals because he was,
course he was.
head of the NRA.
Of course he was.
And Iris Murdoch, who was an author, which I was not. Now, why I bring this up, ladies and gentlemen, we have a country today and a president who is allowing 5 to 7 million illegal people to come into this country. Now, this is on top of another president, George Bush II, who did not much different, and other presidents, all of whom are not impacted by this, other than at the polls. all of whom somehow forget. Why I bring up Alzheimer's is the funding for Alzheimer's is negligible. There has not been one Alzheimer's patient cured. They all die eventually.
Yeah, I know.
There is no change of attitude for private citizens. I read these famous people, not to give them any special consideration, but to show how prominent and how horrible a disease it is. Now, we had plenty of money, plenty of exposure for what disease? AIDS.
AIDS, yeah.
Now, politically correct, AIDS. I don't say we should not have help. Of course we should. And I'm glad that there has been something that has, deterred the disease in many ways. But here are people, and people right in our audience, who either have a loved one or have contracted a form of it. No one's going to care about them. But no one talks about it, and of course the press is in the tank for the liberal Democrats. No one can take the dots and put them together. All the money that having illegal immigrants in here costs this country. And don't think for 1 minute it doesn't. This feel-good, do-good mentality. California, 15 years ago on the radio, I saw and read, 15 years ago, they said every immigrant was costing every taxpayer the total amount of immigrants, illegals, were costing taxpayers $9,000 per person.
I remember that statistic.
That's correct.
I do.
So here again, we go to what this country used to be, and that's where these axioms come from, Kenny. Charity begins at home. We don't follow that anymore. We give billions of dollars to countries who just as soon blow us up. What makes any sense in that? We're all asked to change our habits. We're all asked to change our finances. We're all asked to tuck it in. Why doesn't the government use that and say, listen, we can't afford it. We're going to have to cut what we give you, Syria, in half. We're going to have to cut what we give. It just is, to me, mind-boggling. And this, again, is another example of America's screwed up priorities. And I'm talking to, I hope a few Democrats are watching. You can't keep voting for the same people in the political system that we have. They don't do the right thing. They do what's easiest and where the media is going. We've got to be willing to take on the media. And until we do, the wonderful majority of black people have got to start taking a stand against this minority of miscreants and misbehaviors. It's about behavior, not about race, too often now. Now, I do not suggest that this is a pain that the black people suffered when I was young, in the 60s. I remember, you do, Kenny.
Oh, yes,
I remember Selma, Alabama. I remember the marches.
I grew up in Roxbury.
Yeah. Well, I remember how people were treated, and I understand the bitterness.
Right.
But two wrongs don't make a right, and that's what I see now. People are keeping quiet because in the black community, one, they're afraid to confront, like a lot on the white community are. But the real thing is, this is no longer a racist thing. We have a black president. We have a black governor. We had one. We have a lot of people on television, in the industry, in athletics, in entertainment. It's not the same way it was. It was horrible when I was 20. It is no longer. And when you don't recognize how much progress has been made, and when you allow, again, miscreants and people who are bitter just to be bitter because they don't like themselves to dictate the agenda? I mean, when this president can have people like Al Sharpton. One, he's got a television show, so it should be a conflict of interest that he's down there in the White House. Same thing with when he had that fool Chris Matthews. Doesn't pay his tax bill, Sharpton. Lied about police officers over a girl that supposedly had been raped. Never was, never happened. It was adjudicated. And yet the police today still are taking this baloney. So it's in our hands. And it depends on us, collectively, black, white, Catholic, Protestant. And this other thing about Muslims, I'm tired of it, sorry. It was Muslims on those two planes. It's been Muslims. It was a Muslim at the hood. It's Muslims. Now, either the Muslim community stands up and starts doing something, or we have to take it as a whole, period. I'm sick of these apologists for all of this nonsense. By the way, we have our number up here. Again, we're not really 508-830-3971.
And people should also know that they can tune into the Don McKeag Show if they miss a show.
Yes.
They can tune in to the show that they miss on YouTube. By going to YouTube.
That's correct.
And
just
typing in
now, can they hear what
McKeag,
you're saying?
Yes, they can. The
Okay,
Don McKeag TV Show. And you'll be able to watch all of the episodes of this fine program.
Yes.
I want to back you up just one thing on your ARP piece.
Yes.
I have firsthand experience with
Alzheimer's. Yes, I'm sorry to hear that.
My mom passed, and when she passed in 2001, we didn't know that she had Alzheimer's at the time. So we asked to have an autopsy done. And it was at that time that we found out that she was at stage 5.
Wow.
And I was always amazed. I would go home and I would say to my lovely wife, I can't believe Mom is remembering things from 1917, 1918, 1919 like it was yesterday. But she can't remember that I was there the day before.
That's correct.
And that's when I got to understand this horrible disease.
But you see, Ken, this is one of the things that really, I hate to use infuriate, but I use it because that's my temperament. Mm-hmm. It infuriates me about these people in today's America who focus on political correctness. They deal and spend, there's no end of the money they're giving out in a variety of ways.
Right.
Variety of ways. But Alzheimer's is a brain disease.
Right.
The study of the brain is still, believe it or not, mostly at its infancy. But they do know the human being, I believe, only uses between 10 and 12%, or maybe a little more, of the brain that's here, right up here. We know about the right side and the left side, the one's creative, the others. Now, we have such geniuses and such increase in technology in what they're able to do, as they were with AIDS. Remember, AIDS was incurable.
Right.
But it takes money. And yet there's no funding, either from the government or from other institutions. And you know what I believe? Again, this is why I don't like what's happened too. This country worships youth. And I believe one of the reasons Alzheimer's is put into the back burner is whether it be directly admitted to or just psychologically. Oh, they're that old. They're going to die of something.
Right.
Don't you? I believe that's at the end, in the beginning.
Right.
But on top of that, And so there's always money for these young, struggling people. Of course, half of them are struggling because they refuse to work. They don't even look for a job anymore because now they can just get a charge card, hang out. This bunch of boobs up here today, I guarantee they weren't working. I guarantee it.
The Herald already started doing a piece on what happened on the highway.
Oh, it's a disgrace.
Most of the people were spending time talking about their minority status.
Yeah.
They were, I can't remember all of the different words, but I was
Well, most
listening.
of them there were white, though.
I was listening, yeah, but they were putting themselves into a minority
Oh, I
group by
know.
adding words and hyphenating everything.
Yeah. Oh,
But
it's
Howie
just
Carr is doing a piece on it because he's trying to find out how many of them have EBT cards.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, how many from out of state. You see, nowadays, just like Ferguson and the rest of them.
Right.
You know, the initial event was peanuts compared to what happened months later. They had people being paid to go there that do it for a living.
Right.
That's how they're on it. How about this, ladies and gentlemen? Does this make you happy, liberals? Does this make you happy? You got people that you're giving money to have kids, they don't work, and then they're able to get a job going out and rabble-rousing and get paid. And believe me, it's more than you think. And the other thing that let's reinforce this illegal immigrants in California that you would question me on, that I held to zing at the end. Those of you that think that it's the grove or the fruit growers and all of the people that own all those big orange groves, that they're responsible. 2% of all illegal immigrants ever worked for or do work for any of those fruit growers or any of those farmers.
That's right.
They're here hanging out, many of them living in garages.
It's
a disgrace, and it's a disgrace not on them. It's a disgrace on the liberal establishment that thinks they're doing a good thing.
You go by Lowe's in the morning.
Yep.
You go by Home Depot in the morning. You'll see a truck come by. They'll pick up some people, and away they go.
Yep.
Then they'll bring them back later on in the day, get out of the truck, walk into the parking lot again.
Well, I mean, when I was living in, no less, when I was living in Hyannisport, no less, 20 years ago, the postmaster, I mean, I used to walk down, get my mail in that little post office where the Kennedys and everybody used to hang out. And this was when they were talking about welfare reform. Of course, it didn't come from the Democrats. That's cruel.
Didn't know.
But the postmaster said, all you got to do is, you want to find out the fraud, all you got to do is go to every post office. The postmen know who's getting checks that have no business getting a check.
Right, on the
they know who's
15th.
getting a Social Security check and their mother or father is dead.
You can go to Walmart
yeah.
and do the same thing in Walmart.
Do you think the government is bright enough for one? You know why? Because the press now accuses them of being nasty. I mean, it's all about the press, and that's because they all want to get reelected. They don't want to lose their job.
There are some people that need the helping hand.
There's no.
But
I'm all for welfare. I always was.
But there is a lot of abuse going on, Donnie.
Well, anyway, let's get to what I was going to talk about. A book that looks like it's worth reading. I read a great one called His Excellency about George Washington. That's why I really know what I'm saying when I never realized just how great a man he was in so many ways. But, of course, in today's America, he had slaves.
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson had slaves.
Yes.
So they're evil people because they had slaves. You cannot do that, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, both those men released their slaves when they were, Thomas Jefferson died bankrupt, by the way.
Right.
But I'm not sticking up for slavery. Again, those are, but you can't judge what was going on in those days. That was an industry of cotton and of tobacco. We did not have the population we had. It is still wrong. But the system came about because they needed labor.
Right.
and they got labor. And black people sold their own people. African traders were where a lot of the slavery emanated from. Blacks themselves were not free of any kind of involvement on this. Again, this is not to minimize the tragedy of slavery. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that it is not right to judge everyone that had a slave in the 16 and 1700s. But think of this man who now is fighting the British, the greatest army, the greatest power in the world at that time. He's having trouble holding on to his men. It's below zero. Some don't even have shirts on. 1779 to 1780. This is from the book Washington Revolution, Washington's apostrophe S, Revolution. And I can hardly read the author, but it's in here. Making of America's First Leader. The Army went into winter quarters without much in the way of food or clothing, a lack that continued well into 1780. It also made the move without any certainty that it would be able to replace the men whose enlistments were expiring. And then there were the deserters who simply took off for home, time remaining on their tours of duty be damned. Fortunately, this last group was not numerous, and those who scorned desertion were often tough-minded veterans. The winter of 1779 and 80 proved to be one of the worst that longtime residents in New York and New Jersey remembered. Washington talked with these people himself, looking at the ice on the ground, the frozen streams, rivers, and creeks alike, watching snow pile up. His soldiers, meanwhile, felt the sting of the wind, sometimes without shirts on their back. It was a familiar story, and this goes on and on. They would be without meat for more than 6 days. There was no way of hunting. There was no way of getting provisions. At times he knew that what he asked for would not be given. Boat owners along the river sometimes seemed willing to help the Continental Army without compensation, but such generosity proved to be rare. Most wanted a guarantee that they would be paid to let them use the boat. This is an army. This is the army that won the Revolutionary War. Does that mean anything to you people? These men gave up their homes, gave up their lives, gave up their arms and legs to make this country what it is. No one else, but a couple of them had slaves. They didn't even, when the ice used to freeze up the mills, you know, we have a mill up here in Plymouth. The ice, when it got frozen, they couldn't grind the flour. And that was the staple, was flour to make bread. So the soldiers would be out there grinding corn, grinding whatever grain they could get if they could find it, and making what came to be some kind of pseudo bread. Anyway, later in the month of January 1780, something must have worked, for Washington described the Army's situation at present as comfortable and easy on the score of provisions. The comfort soon vanished, however, and he resumed the process he despised. Here he is, the greatest man in America, begging for support of all kinds from all people. He begged himself. He didn't send emissaries. He wasn't a snob. Now, let's look at what we have in New York with the mayor. I don't know if you're aware of this mayor that's in there. Here's the facts, okay? This is why I left the Democratic Party. This has been going on far too long. The mayor, did you know he was once Hillary Clinton's campaign manager? From New York, city of New York. Remember what he did to the police? The police turned their backs. They're fed up with him, fed up with his kind, and so am I. And that's why I'm going to tell you what his background is and what he's really like, and tell you the shame of, on the one hand, hearing what George Washington and the troops went through in New York in the winter of 1779, when bird brains like this are being paid big money, big insurance, big retirements, living in palaces, traveling all over the world on missions. Here's some of the facts. Listen, first of all, he's known as Bill de Blasio, Democrat. Surprise, surprise. Sounds like an Italian. We'll see. He was born Warren Wilhelm Jr. That's his name, Warren Wilhelm. Sounds German, doesn't it? Well, we'll see. He was born on May 8, 1961. He first changed his name to the hyphenated Warren de Blasio-Wilhelm, adding his mother's maiden name. In 2002, that's 13 years ago, he dropped the Warren and the Wilhelm and changed his name for a second time to what is currently Bill de Blasio. Sounded better. The working stiff in New York, all the Democrats that roll their sleeves up for any Democrat. And he became the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton in the year 2000. He was also a fervent supporter of the Marxist Sandinista government in Nicaragua in the 1980s, a government that was backed by the Communist Soviet Union and Cuba. He's now the mayor of New York. At the height of the Cold War tension, while still a student at NYU, de Blasio toured the Communist Soviet Union in 1983. His first job was in 1984 with the New York City Department of Juvenile Justice. This is when he learned how evil you police officers are. I added that. He received a master's degree in international and public affairs at Columbia University, the same school attended by Barack Obama. Bill de Blasio ran Democrat New York Congressman Charlie Rangel's re-election campaign in 1994. By the way, has anybody heard him where he worked for a living? Huh? These politicians, they ever own a business? They ever employ anybody? In 1994, he married a lesbian activist, Shirlane McRae. The newlyweds honeymooned in Fidel Castro's communist Cuba. She happens to be black also. Very good for his politics and for today's voting Democrat, liberal or otherwise. This is what the Democrats have now formed their opinions based on. Not on merit, not on their past, strictly on political correctness. In 1909, de Blasio's election campaign to be New York City's third public advocate was supported by the pro-communism Working Families Party. It's a great name, isn't it? Just another name for communism. Communism doesn't work, ladies and gentlemen. Capitalism isn't the greatest. It's got its flaws, but it's produced the greatest country the world has ever seen, and others. Both of de Blasio's parents were communists, leading historian Ron Raudosh to describe him as, quote, a bona fide red diaper baby. When he ran for mayor of New York, he received 72% of the vote with those credentials. And you wonder why people like Don McKeag are on television and on the radio. It's to point this out. This is all fact. Look it up. Look him up. You won't read it in the papers. Have you heard Al Sharpton talk about his background? Have you heard Chris Matthews? Have you heard any of the major networks? I don't even think Fox does this. I guess it would be too volatile. There are crimes being committed as we speak now by the hundreds. I guarantee there isn't 1% of them being committed by a police officer. I guarantee it. But you're voting for Democrats that are going to continue to demean the police force. Every organization has a bad egg. We've seen Democrats, God knows, don't hand me that nonsense, weed out the bad ones. What they've done to our law enforcement officers, men and women who give and take their life in their hands every single day in this vicious country that's been spurred on and whetted up by the media, by the liberal-controlled, college graduate, filled heads by these professors that live like kings in their ivory palaces and then stand in front of our kids and preach socialist garbage. And those kids go out into the world like this bird. Of course, he had it at home too. So I try to stay calm, but I don't do it very well, as you can tell. It is of concern, and again, I talk about why I read that quote, and I do it all the time again, by Martin Luther. What is your conscience going to tell you when you vote now? Are you going to worry about your grandfather coming out of the grave because you're not voting for a Democrat? I keep telling people, I'm independent. I'm not asking people to vote for Republicans. I'm asking them to understand we can't have what we have anymore. What is it going to take? And by the way, can you imagine after that mess in Paris and France, if George Bush hadn't attended? Do you know, the Prime Minister of France was one of the first to fly over to this country in 9/11. Does anybody remember that? We don't even send an emissary. And the press gives Obama a pass on that. If that had been a Republican, or a Bush especially, he'd have been vilified. And you that are watching, if you have an open mind, know that. And it's got to stop. It's got to stop. Why didn't he go, Obama? Why? And if he couldn't go, why wasn't John Kerry there? Or Biden? Someone to show the United States, the greatest country in this world, had serious concerns and empathy for the French. But it'll get away with it in today's press. And this goes on and on and on. So, thanks for joining me. And again, this show will be repeated Monday at 11 p.m., Tuesday at 9 a.m., Wednesday at 1 p.m. God bless. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next Thursday. Many thanks to my producer, Ken Bukes. And as I say, have a wonderful weekend coming up. And let's work together to try to change things and address some of these things. Don't be apathetic because everything in your life seems to be okay. Good night. This is Don McKeag. Bye.